welcome to the Channel Zone. My name's Mark Edwards. We've got a very special guest with us today. Indeed, we have Ruth Bowen. Welcome, Ruth. Ruth is a multilingual specialist in sales, leadership, and channel enablement, with a reputation for driving measurable sales results and positive customer outcomes. She's worked for vendors like VMware and Symantec, and with distributors to help them successfully enable their own sales teams and those of their channel partners. Ruth now provides her experience and professional services as an independent consultant. Welcome, Ruth.
Thanks very much, and great to be here, and good to talk to you and everybody who listens and watches this. So,
well,
enablement, my favourite subject.
Tell us more, please.
Yeah, came up with a tiny bit of structure for talking about this, and wanted to talk about enablement, but also wanted to talk about how it relates to channel. This being the channel zone. Simon Sinek always says, "Find your why." So thought we'd start there, and then I did slightly shamelessly adapt and go what and how, rather than his order of how and what. But anyway, when we, I thought why, what, how would be a good way of thinking about, first of all, enablement. Why do organizations and individuals do it? And then what do you need to do? What do you need to enable? And then the how is how to approach it. And in all of that, what's worked well for me and the various organizations I've worked for, Veritas, Symantec, various channel organizations, VMware, and in great enablement roles that I've really loved doing and working with great teams. Let's go into the why then. And why enable salespeople, first of all? And, for me, the ultimate is set them up for success. And if we give them the right enablement, we arm them to compete and differentiate. We deliver them the knowledge and skills about not only the portfolio and products that they're selling, but a whole bunch of different things that they need to know. And I'll go into that in a bit when we go into the what. But then if we do that well, means that they can engage really well with their customers. And that then enables everybody, organizations and individuals, to meet their objectives and deliver on the results they need to deliver on and get recognized and rewarded for that. So, that's always something that both helps organizations and helps individuals. And when you think about your channel partners and why would you enable them, then exactly the same applies. What changes is the what and the how with channel partners, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So for me, rather than the question being why, it's the question, why wouldn't you? When we think about what to enable, for me, it falls into three main areas, and they're all interlinked and build on each other. And the first one is the knowledge. And this quite often starts with product and portfolio, as I already mentioned. We need to know how to sell. We need to know what we have in the kit bag and how to sell it. And that often leads to an accreditation. And that's often a start point, which is rightly so, a good place to start. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the knowledge bucket that is really going to help us be successful selling those products, that portfolio. And it's our market, but it's also thinking about our customers. What market are they in? And what are the big industry topics that are affecting them? So, big
the
ones
trends.
like cloud, absolutely.
Containers.
Big ones like cloud, yeah. Containers is another big one.
Yes. I've just done one with on Kubernetes as part of the kind of container environment. How much knowledge base? As the other thing, I was working with a big global vendor recently, and I was stunned by the sheer volume of materials that are now available to salespeople. Extraordinary in terms of where it was videos, slide decks, white papers, playbooks, competition kind of information, battle cards and whatever else. Extraordinary.
You're beating me to it.
Right.
Because yes, absolutely. And the key thing with that is how you get it all organized so people can consume it more easily. and
Yeah.
then build it into your program, which will, I want to talk about under the how. But yes, assets are key in the knowledge area, but also in the whole flow of an enablement program, and in particular the structured delivery part, to underpin how you build people's knowledge, how you give them a playbook that then is something that they can use ongoing, and
Yes.
how that all gets organized so that both internal salespeople and partners can access this stuff really easily and use it at the right time in the right places.
Mm-hmm.
Just to take us back to my lovely Venn diagram, and the reason it is a Venn diagram, by the way, is that the sweet spot is where it all comes together in the middle. And
Right,
you
got you.
get knowledge, skills, and competencies all interlocking in this, real sweet spot
Yes.
of of confidence in front of the customer, which is what this is all pointing to, or ideally
Mm.
would be.
Mm.
So yeah, when we think about knowledge, then we talked about market and industry, competitive landscape. That's a big one. Understanding our customer, there's a lot of knowledge you can build about the verticals they're in, the use cases they're going to have for our type of solution
Yeah.
in those verticals, but also the ecosystem from a technology perspective that's going to sit around that. You need to understand that, because then you understand where you fit. And then also who you're going to be dealing with. You can read up on the customer roles, the personas, what motivates them, what makes them successful. So there's an awful lot of stuff you can build in the knowledge phase. It can be via all kinds of means. We'll talk about that in a minute. I mentioned sort of product and portfolio enablement, and the fact that often leads to an accreditation, which is great, and that's an
Mm.
absolute great start point. But that, to me, doesn't mean you've enabled your salespeople, because they could know everything they need to know about your portfolio, but if
Mm.
they don't know that greater context that we've just talked about with knowledge, you then need to think about what are the skills to be able to really bring that to life in a customer conversation. And that's where the skills come into play. And there's a few things, there's a few things I wrote down to that you would think about in the skills context. Pitching, first of all, being able to articulately and succinctly
Mm.
pitch what you have and why the customer would want to talk to you in the first place.
That sounds like a
And
whiteboard to me, Ruth. That sounds like a perfect
ooh,
slot
it
for a
definitely
whiteboard
could
pitch.
be. It definitely could be. And and at that time, building the rapport that's going to make that customer want to have that
Mm.
conversation with you. Then once you get
Mm.
into it, then being able to do the discovery questioning on an informed basis,
Mm.
that can mean that you find out more about what value really means to the customer, and what
Yeah.
the business need is that the customer's got, and the solution that they're looking for. And by solution, I mean solution to their problem, not a
Mm.
solution which is a collection of the products we've got.
Once again,
And
I'm seeing another whiteboard here in my mind's eye, instead of a discovery conversation with a customer.
yeah, oh yeah, most definitely, and
Yes.
that'd be a great way to do it, because well, and some of the best sales conversations I ever had back in the day when I was selling to customers was, if you had a whiteboard triangle, I can only draw a triangle, so that was pretty much the only whiteboard I ever had. And but then if you can get your customer drawing on your triangle that you've done on his whiteboard, then absolutely brilliant. Or even just on, a
Yeah,
piece of
or
paper in
even on a
front
piece of
of you.
paper. I say the Moleskine
Yeah.
notebook, which is now the salesperson's kind of tool of choice in some respects for that face-to-face meeting. But the pre-sales people that I've encountered over the years are perhaps the ones generally most comfortable on their feet at a whiteboard. But many of them have also said that the moment when the customer gets to their feet and kind of stands alongside them and maybe takes a pen, and the two of them are effectively collaborating on this. It's
brilliant.
kind of the deal. I wouldn't say necessarily sealed at that point. But the act of co-creation, it does it as a co-creator of that solution with the customer. It probably puts you in a very, very strong position.
So yeah, all those skills are important. You're also likely to get a few objections that present themselves along the way. So
Of
objection
course.
handling is another great skill. Navigating stakeholders, a key one, because if you've managed to create a good start point with your direct interlocutor you're dealing with, then there are bound, we all need to engage higher and wider within customers these days, and navigating stakeholders and being able to repeat that discovery process with roles that maybe you're not so familiar with. That's a
Financial
real skill.
director, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real skill. And that then, going back to the knowledge, takes more knowledge that you need to build about what their area of expertise looks like, and what are the things that they need in order to be successful, and how can you be aware of that and drive the conversation in that vein. And that can be quite tricky if it's areas that you've never really had any exposure to, but you can do a lot to help yourself there, with reading the kind of press that they would read, for example, and making sure that you have, Glenn talked about an understanding of balance sheets, things like that. Then yeah, um, those are
I
all
wonder
good
how
things
much
to
is
do.
you often see with tech propositions, you'll often see claims to savings, usually in the multi-millions of dollars. Do you know what I mean? Do this, save 3 million in 6 months, or save 10 million, any examples that are given. But I wonder as to, said those, I'm not so sure that the salespeople in their conversations with the customers can actually go through and put together that financial savings program, how it's achieved. That's maybe I'm guessing incorrectly there. I don't know, but are the typical tech salespeople savvy enough, capable of perhaps having that more detailed conversation on where the savings actually come from, if it is savings, or even
Well,
efficiencies, where those numbers appear from?
one of the things that I've always tried to do in enablement programs is encourage salespeople to assemble as many anecdotal examples as they can possibly find. And it depends at what stage in the sales cycle you're talking about this. We're not talking about references, but we're
Right.
talking about proof points that help drive a conversation,
Yes.
that talk about how we've been able to help customers like you. And that can be tricky, finding in the same country customers that are from the same vertical. But whatever you can do as a salesperson, I think, to be able to cite, not anonymously, customers in a particular space that you've been able to help, and how you've been able to help them, and the kind of saving, how they've been able to save, first of all, and then possibly the order of magnitude of it. But a lot of it is how. And I think, again, that's the importance of working closely with marketing to make sure that you're leveraging every single bit of collateral that they've got, but
Yes.
also every single bit of intelligence that you've got within your own sales organization that
Yep.
helps you I always refer to it as little darts of examples that you can use, that you can fire at the right moment into the conversation,
Yes.
that act as proof points, because that, as a customer, they're wanting anything that builds your credibility.
Yes.
They're wanting proof points as to why they should consider
Yes. And if you can say
continue
who
the
else has done
conversation
it,
with
who
you.
else has benefited, it's as I say, it's a big win
Yeah,
for the
but
customer.
again, it's
They're able to
not
progress.
you're not necessarily going to be in a position to name customers or name
Right.
people. But it's a question of knowledgeably being able to give examples of how you've been able to help customers in a particular space, and if the space
Yes.
is a similar space and in your
Yes.
country, then that's ideal.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we talked about a few skills. Qualification and negotiation are two others that spring to mind, and this stage might culminate in a certification. And again, that's great. So you would have, in my mind, an accreditation would relate to knowledge, a certification would relate to skills, the ability to use that knowledge in a sales situation, and then for me, competencies. This is all about doing it consistently over time, and this is key then in the kind of follow-up reinforcement coaching stage of an enablement process, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this would be consistently being able to successfully engage customers, navigate stakeholders, and use that to create win-win relationships. Things like, being able to successfully frame a business proposition that encapsulates a forward view of those savings that you're talking about that typically need to be there. And then how you actually make sure you deliver ongoing customer value that you can then, that is then critical for customer satisfaction and loyalty, and your ability then to go and sell more to that customer. And, this stage then would show through in the success of the individual, the success of the teams they're working with, and the customer experience over time. So competencies for me are an over time thing. And of course, partner experience counts there too, because they're part of the critical ecosystem the salesperson's working with.
Big picture of what to enable.
Big picture of the what to enable. There's a lot there. But
how?
Then we get to the how, and that's the really key one. And there's a lot here as well. So firstly, you've got to think about, what's my enablement program look like? And this typically is fed by what is the organizational initiative that has driven the need for an enablement program. So, if you're launching a new value proposition, for example, or you're launching a new sales methodology, or you are launching a new sales, a new hire sales ramp-up program, based on the overarching initiative, you're then going to figure out what are you trying to achieve in your enablement program, and what are the metrics you're going to use to measure that. So, and then you're going to think about your audience, and this might seem an obvious one, but actually often you need to segment your audience. And so if you think about the initiative in question, who needs to be actively enabled and what are the roles? And then who needs to be the support and the coach? And you would typically think managers. But actually for big initiatives like this, then champions in the field might be great too. And those might be, I've worked really successfully with champions in the field before. And it's a great way of doing it in tandem with obviously managers doing their leadership role. And then there's a piece about who needs to be informed and what are those functions, and can we include them in the more active enablement? In new hire training, for example, in the past, we've found in companies I've worked for that including functions like marketing, sales operations, finance, and then the condition for being included was that they are in a sales training, so they operate like a salesperson, because actually ultimately we're all salespeople when it comes down to it. And actually we ended up in a situation with new functions asking, could their people join? But in particular, we need to target the audience for the particular initiative, because we can't necessarily have everybody in the active enablement phase. So anyway, timing, format and structure. When are you going to do it, and how are you going to do it, and what's the structure of it? And we'll talk about this in a bit. What's not on this slide, but I really do want to highlight, is your subject matter experts. I mentioned before that without other functions, you absolutely could not be successful with enablement, and subject matter experts are absolutely at the top of my list on that one.
Right.
They're key to success, and at this stage you absolutely need to think about who are the SMEs, as we call them, who are going to be needed for the enablement, and what role do we want them to play, and do we have access to them? So the whole process of getting them involved in the planning would start at this stage, and making sure they're comfortable with what we'd like their role to be. And those people can be anything from technology evangelists, SE leaders, sales managers, salespeople, SEs,
customer even.
Customers are great if we can get customers involved, even just on video clips.
Yes.
Partners, the same. But
Mm.
also marketing people, sales operations people, if we're talking about sales methodology and sales process. There are all kinds of people that are important depending on the overall initiative that you're driving. And I've got to say, I've worked with some brilliant SMEs over the years, all of them. And I'd like to thank all of them that I've ever worked with, because absolutely couldn't have done a thing without you. So yeah, shall I go on to the delivery part and
Do
talking
that.
about
Yeah,
that?
please, let's do that. But quick question. So if we move forward on the next part, but the question there for me was, how often do you find a difference when running? Oftentimes you might run a program once, and I have found that actually it's when running events or programs multiple times, that's when you get the opportunity to improve it. It gets better and better and better.
And sometimes you do stuff only once, depends what it is.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
if it's a workshop for managers, for example, that's about a particular new element, you might only get the opportunity to do it once.
To do it the once, yeah.
Yeah. So better really focus on incorporating all your previous experience and making sure you get it as right as possible on the day.
Agreed.
And
yeah.
For me, getting it right also involves as many of the members of the intended audience as possible to give input, to review, to do things. I mean, I love it if it's a room full of salespeople or a room full of managers, getting managers to be able to stand up and give their examples, their contributions, their tips and tricks. And the best way to do that is making sure everything's interactive, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, structuring your delivery. What you're thinking about here is how you engage your audience, get your key points across, but actually it is about how you get the points across, but actually really, who do people learn from? They actually learn from each other most of all. And so allowing for interaction and activities to discuss and actually hear best practice from each other, that for me has always been the most powerful moment in anything I've run. And then as you're going along, gain a view of progress so that you can feed that back in on the fly, because correction on the fly is a great thing, but also show them what we've done. So that's one of the things you want to be building in, because that's motivating for people who have invested the time into attending any kind of enablement. You want to give them the motivation to be able to feel it's going to have an impact on them afterwards. So 3 stages, nice and simple. So pre-work first of all, then the enablement itself, and then the follow-up. And broadly, what you're looking at here, in the pre-work, we're doing the knowledge build. So as you can see, this is mapping back to the what. In the enablement stage itself, we're doing the skills build. And then in the follow-up reinforcement coaching, that's where we're doing the competence build. It's a tiny little bit oversimplistic, but as a construct, it works.
But it completes the process from my perspective there. I've always been a bit cautious on pre-work. Maybe I'm a bit too cynical over the years, but in terms of when pre-work has been provided for people to do, I'm never confident that even a majority of people will actually do it. People seem to be. You're going to say?
It's like everything you do with enablement. You've got to show the value of what you're asking them to do. And actually, for me, the pre-work phase is critical because in the enablement phase, you're asking for their time. So if you're going to ask for their time on some kind of live basis, whether it's in person or not, then wouldn't it be good if they were as prepped as possible before they pitch up?
Absolutely.
And that's what the pre-work is about. The pre-work is about building the knowledge so that in the enablement phase, you can concentrate on building the skills to bring the knowledge to life. And that's where it's going to be a lot more interactive. That's where it's going to be a lot more activity-based. that's where you're going to use things like role plays, you're going to use things like presentations, pitches, working in teams, working individually. A lot more fun, but also a lot more effective.
It's hugely effective. Is it the one without the other? I just don't think works, to be honest. As said, if
it certainly doesn't work if you haven't given them the opportunity to build the knowledge before, because otherwise they're coming in cold, and that is absolutely not going to work for you or them.
Yes.
So the knowledge build, there's a lot of different things that you can get them to do. And you were talking about, the number of assets and videos and all of that. That's where some of that comes into play in this phase. So, if you want them, go back to the example about the new value proposition launch. So before they come into the enablement phase, you want them to understand what that new value proposition is, what the components of it are, what the underlying product offerings are, what the competition looks like, how this is going to resonate with customers, what kind of customers, what kind of use case, sounding familiar. So basically an awful lot of that, you can start building that knowledge in the pre-work phase through webinars, videos, reading, customer examples, online training, typically maybe with a test after, so that you can see how far you've come. There might be an accreditation of all of that. But what you typically also would do in the pre-sales, in the pre-work phase, particularly around the value proposition launch example, you would give them an example of somebody delivering the new value prop, maybe a sales leader, maybe give them a script that they can adapt for themselves, and then ask them to do an exercise where they actually prepare how they would do that in front of one of their customers.
Yes.
And so then they've got to really think about, what is the customer situation, the customer business problem that they've got? How do I tweak this value proposition to appeal to them and resonate with some of the challenges that they're facing and some of the ways that they might be able to solve those challenges? Obviously, then when you get to the actual enablement piece, that's where you want to make it a lot more interactive. And you, according to how you've segmented your audience, you're then going to plan how you use their time best, with larger groups or with smaller groups. Obviously larger groups, that's more of a presentation format. Smaller groups, more of a workshop format. Although, even if you're online and even if you're with a larger group now, if you do some careful planning and chunking up, you can actually combine presentation and breakouts. And actually, if you need to work with a larger group, then you can make it work. But it's all about dealing with, you mentioned attention spans, that's really important. Make frequent changes of focus, switch from large group to small breakouts quickly, structure your breakouts, but also make sure you've got breakout facilitators so that people don't spend 10 minutes going, what are we doing? And, which it happens.
Which would be my fear.
Absolutely. Yes. So you have facilitators and you're very clear about here's what we're asking you to do, and then who's going to feed back. Then we're going to be thinking about coaching in particular, because we're looking at building ongoing competence, and there may be follow-up enablement. You might have check-in clinics, and along this whole process you're going to be using playbooks and other assets to underpin what you've been doing. But remembering that in the enablement you're going to have done a lot of customer focused things like pitching, presentations, role plays, and that's going to really help you then bring it into the customer world. Working with your partners, and of course that's where we now want to bring it to how we apply it to channel. The triangle there is not a how to enable channel, it's a key consideration in the how to apply it to channel. How we apply it needs to be appropriate for the partner's business, and how we do it is going to be in function of how the company you work for has segmented their go-to-market. And this is just a simple example of the type of segmentation that a lot of companies would have, where they're basically looking at their target customer set and they're thinking, right, where do those sit and how are we going to organize our planning and resourcing to be able to focus high touch salespeople or high touch partner salespeople, maybe towards the top of the stack, and then getting more appropriate coverage model as we go down the stack. They're going to focus their solution packaging potentially at different segments within this triangle. And exactly the same applies to how you focus, how you work with your partners and how you enable partners. And you're likely to have a higher touch, as I mentioned, towards the top of the pyramid. And this is also where you're going to have partner account managers involved in some mode. And that basically means you can have a sales-led and workshop-led approach further towards the top of the triangle. And that's going to allow you to work closely with partner account managers and targeting specific partners potentially, and work with them first of all to enable their partners and run things like call out days, which of course are really effective both at getting focus and getting time with your partners, but also starting to build your pipeline. But then as enablement, as a partner account manager, then there's a brilliant co-sell opportunity on the opportunities that start coming out of that, and that is a great way of enabling. So, that's the opportunity there. Obviously, all of the other ways of enabling are going to come into play at any point in the triangle, because product accreditation is always going to be key for channel, because that unlocks a number of the benefits that partners get through the partner program, both financial and non-financial. So clearly we want to make sure that we're covering the accreditation, but the real opportunity is to take wider enablement to our partners, the type of enablement that we're doing for our salespeople, appropriately packaged and appropriately delivered. And as we get further down the stack, then we're going to be thinking about how we package things up in boxes so that distributors, for example, who are a critical partner up and down the whole stack. But as we try to get broader reach, then distributors can really help us with that. But we can help them by making our content really consumable and really easily accessible and findable and coherent in terms of flow. And when we think back to what we looked at before in terms of the enablement structure, if we make really clear learning paths out of that, then partners are going to be able to follow that in a coherent way. And that means that online models and more remote models are going to work more effectively. And then when we get to assets and playbooks and some of the other things that we talked about near at the beginning, then again, that's going to really help underpin a structured approach to enablement. And the more structured we get, the more easily partners can understand what we have and consume it. And because we need to make sure that whatever we're providing, assets or enablement, works with them on their day-to-day way they sell. Because if we want them to do something different to what they ordinarily do, guess what? They'll do something else. So let's really understand them and their business, provide enablement that's relevant and that can be easily accessible and consumable. And then let's underpin with assets that they can use day to day while they're selling and engaging with their customers. Measurement, we talked about that, and that is a critical thing, both to show as enablement what we've done, how has that actually paid us back as a company, but also how has that benefited our salespeople, how has that benefited our partners, what kind of feedback are we getting? And typically as an enablement team, you would do a debrief with your leadership on a regular basis, and it would include activity measures and impact measures, and it would also include an element of verbatim feedback as well that would really help understand how we need to improve next time.
I was going to say, and this, in terms of the impact measures, I suppose billion-dollar question that I'd ask you here on this one then is the impact of enablement itself, is the ROI element. Have we succeeded? Are we able to today deliver a very clear expression of, we did this is the cost of it, and time and materials and resources and whatever else, but this is what it's delivered? As I said, maybe I don't know whether you'd call it the billion-dollar question, the $64,000 question, but in the minds of many organizations, it's what is the material value? Are we delivering a return on that expense and investment?
Well, I think what's important is to show contribution, and impact measures are going to allow you to do that.
Got you.
You don't get the impact unless you've had the activity, obviously.
Yeah.
So, things like people actually showing up, the feedback that you get that shows you whether what you've delivered is relevant, consumable, and has actually been usable in the field. But also then the results that you're able to show out of maybe the presentations that they've done, the certifications they've achieved, the accreditations they've achieved. Those are kind of leading indicators, if you like. And if you go into the impact measures, there are other leading indicators that are in there, like customer engagement, for example. It's quite difficult to measure. It's a bit less systems driven, but if we're engaging managers and if we're working closely with sales teams, then we can get a measure of customer engagement. And are we engaging with new customers? Are we engaging with new contacts within our existing customers? Are we engaging higher? Are we engaging wider? Depends what our objectives are, right? And then out of that, what's our pipeline build? And obviously we can measure that in systems.
Yes.
But bearing in mind that enablement's a contributor. I'm never going to claim for enablement we did that, because it's actually all about how salespeople go and use it, and it's all about how they're enabled by other functions as well to be able to be successful with their customers. But if we're all doing our contributions right, then we will see an uptick in pipeline build, and we will hopefully see an uptick in pipeline velocity. And if one of our goals was to sell bigger solutions, launching a new value prop, going back to that example, typically we'd be wanting to sell bigger deals with more products in it. And so, how can we measure that both in the pipeline and also once we've converted? And then once we have converted and closed, then what's the measurable value delivery that we are delivering to customers, measurable in both our terms and theirs? And theirs is particularly critical, because then clearly that's going to increase their satisfaction levels, increase our ability to upsell, cross-sell, massively increase their propensity to renew. And all of that is going to make all of us be more successful. And so, if I have to summarize, going back to the why of enablement, it's an investment for sure. It's an investment of money, it's an investment of time, it's an investment of effort. But the measures and the contribution can then show you the payback, and we need to really focus on that. But then something that measures won't necessarily show us, but that's also important, is the fact that your salespeople and partners feel invested in, and they feel set up for success. And if you feel set up for success, guess what? You're probably going to go and drive some. And and that then drives results, and that drives their loyalty to you and their satisfaction with what they're doing. And for my money, those are huge things. And that's one of the big reasons why enablement is, my favorite subject, because, it's helping people to be successful. What's not to like about that?
Well, it's fantastic, Ruth. I could have done with having this conversation maybe 25 years ago when I started out in the training environment.
You were
it was a very
young
different world.
Gibbet.
Wasn't I just? Wasn't I? It was a very different world back then. The challenge in some respects perhaps always was the same. It was about helping develop, let's say specifically in the sales arena, help develop salespeople with their skills and their competencies to go out and be more successful and effective. But it's extraordinary. You said clearly what the conversation has kind of revealed here is the structure and I wouldn't say the science behind it, but as I said, but the organization of the different stages, the different contributory elements to it. And as I said, what you were finishing off with there is an ability to define the return by looking
Absolutely.
at whatever the signals and signs coming from the sales floor, coming through from the order desk. You can very, very clearly see if it's working or not.
So Ruth, then the results. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Ruth, I'm going to say thanks ever so much for your time here today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have, and I hope our viewers and our listeners have too. Ruth, as I said, thanks once again for spending time with us here today. Much appreciated. Let's do this again some point in the future. And until then, all the very best.
Thank you very much. All the best.